Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Haynes. I'm 34 years old, and I genuinely debated for weeks whether or not to share this story publicly, because some of what I'm about to tell you still makes me feel embarrassed. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I stayed so long without ever asking myself why. And if you've ever been the person in your family who just holds everything together quietly, without anyone really noticing, I think you're going to understand every word of this. I need to start at the beginning, because this story only makes sense if you know who I was before Daniel. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, second of three kids, and my mother had this phrase she used constantly. She'd say, "Lauren, you're the strong one. The others need more." I heard that my whole childhood, and I believed it. I turned it into an identity. Being strong meant being selfless. Being selfless meant never asking for anything back. By the time I was 20, I genuinely didn't know how to receive help. I only knew how to give it. I met Daniel at 25. He was warm, funny, calm in a way I found magnetic. He wasn't flashy. He listened when I talked. He remembered small things, the name of my childhood dog, that I hated the smell of lavender, that my favorite meal was my grandmother's pot roast. He made me feel seen in a way that was completely new to me. And that mattered more than I can explain, because I had spent my whole life being useful to people without any of them really looking at me. We got married at 26, and the first 2 years were good, genuinely good. Then his mother got sick. Patricia, Daniel's mom, was diagnosed with early-stage kidney disease the spring after our wedding. And I want to be clear, I loved Patricia. She was warm and funny, and she made Daniel who he was. And when we found out about her diagnosis, I didn't hesitate for a second. I told Daniel we would figure it out together. I meant every word of it. What I didn't anticipate was what figuring it out together would actually mean over the next 8 years. What I didn't anticipate was how slowly and quietly together would become Lauren. Within 6 months, Daniel's hours at work had been reduced, something to do with restructuring, he said, and my income became the household's primary income. I was a registered nurse working 3 to 4 shifts a week. I picked up a fifth, then a sixth during rough stretches. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself this was just the hard season, and hard seasons don't last forever. I was very good at telling myself things. It wasn't temporary. Patricia's treatment costs weren't fully covered by insurance. We started a supplemental fund from our savings. Then our savings ran dry, and we started covering it month to month. Daniel's sister Renee contributed almost nothing. She had, quote, her own financial situation, which from the outside looked an awful lot like a new apartment in a nice part of town and a vacation to Mexico every summer. But nobody pushed Renee. Nobody ever pushed Renee. She had a way of making herself fragile whenever anything was expected of her, and somehow that fragility was always respected in a way that my reliability never was. So I kept working. I kept covering. I stopped mentioning the promotion I'd been offered at the hospital. A charge nurse position that would have come with a significant raise, but also irregular hours and the expectation that I'd be on call. I told myself the timing wasn't right. I turned it down without telling Daniel I'd been offered it. I did that twice more over the following years. And every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering, I cooked, I organized, I cleaned. I drove Patricia to her appointments when Daniel had work conflicts, which happened more often than it probably should have. I sat with her during treatment sometimes, for hours, and held her hand and watched whatever game show was on, and made her laugh when I could, and I don't regret any of that. I want to make that clear right now. I don't regret a single hour I spent with her. What I regret is that I did all of it without once asking myself whether I was okay. I want to pause here and ask you something honestly. Is there someone in your life who just handles things? Someone who shows up, figures it out, never complains, never asks for help, and somehow always has a little more to give? Because if you're watching this right now and that person just appeared in your mind, I want you to check on them this week. Actually check. Not a quick "how are you" text. Actually ask them when they last did something just for themselves. Okay, now let me tell you about the spreadsheet. It was a Tuesday night in February. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter when he went to bed early. He'd had a headache. I was up late finishing a report for work, and I went to move the laptop out of the way to give myself more counter space. The screen was on. There was a document open. I almost didn't look. I genuinely almost just closed it and moved it aside. But the title at the top of the screen caught my eye, and I froze. It said, Lauren, What She's Given. I stood in my kitchen at 11:43 at night, and I stared at that title for a full minute before I even started reading. It was a spreadsheet. Columns, rows, color-coded sections, neat entries with dates going back to, and I had to grip the counter when I saw this, the first year of our marriage. Daniel had been tracking everything, every extra shift I'd worked, the dates, the hours, the estimated income, every appointment I'd driven Patricia to, every family event I'd organized, every bill I'd covered that should have been split between him and Renee. The promotion I turned down in year 3, he had that in there. There was a note next to it that said, Lauren declined without telling me. I found out from her colleague Marta at the Christmas party. She looked embarrassed when she realized I didn't know. The second promotion in year 5, also documented. A note that said, I think she said no again because of our situation. I never gave her a reason to say yes. There were personal entries that undid me completely. An entry from year 4 that said, she burned her hand on the stove making dinner for Mom's birthday. She'd laughed it off. She was still in pain when she went to bed. I watched her try not to show it. An entry from our 6th anniversary. Took her to dinner. She smiled the whole time. I don't think she knows how tired she actually looks. An entry from a random Wednesday in year 7. I think she cried again tonight. In the bathroom, with the fan on. I didn't knock. I should have knocked. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor. I just went down. I sat there and scrolled through 8 years of my own invisible life, documented in my husband's quiet handwriting, and I felt something I still have a hard time describing. It wasn't just sadness. It wasn't even anger, not at first. It was this deep, hollow grief, like finding out the whole time someone had been watching you drown, and filling out a report instead of reaching in. I stayed on that floor for almost an hour. My first instinct, and I'm not proud of this, was to close the laptop and go to bed and never mention it. That was my reflex. Find the hard thing. Absorb it quietly. Disappear it. Move on. I actually stood up to do exactly that. I reached over and almost closed it, and then I read one more entry. Near the very bottom, dated 4 months earlier, November. She has no idea how much I've watched her carry. I keep thinking I'll find the right moment to say something. To say thank you. To say I see you. I'm running out of good reasons for why I haven't said anything yet. I sat back down. I don't know how long I was in that kitchen. At some point, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Daniel came down, probably because he'd woken up and noticed I wasn't in bed. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me on the floor. Lauren? I looked up at him and held up the laptop. I have never seen a person's face do what his did in that moment. It moved through 6 emotions in about 3 seconds. Recognition, shame, fear, and then something that looked, somehow, almost like relief. Like he'd been waiting for this. Like part of him had left it open on purpose and hadn't been brave enough to admit it even to himself. He sat down at the kitchen table. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Finally, I said, how long? He said, since the beginning. I said, why? Why would you keep all of this and never show me, never say any of this out loud to me? He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, because by the time I realized how much you'd given, I'd already let too much of it happen. Every time I thought about bringing it up, I'd realize how late it already was. And then anything I said just felt like too little. So I kept watching, and I kept writing it down, and I told myself I'd find the right way to make it right eventually. I looked at him for a long time across that table, and I said, Daniel, watching someone drown and documenting it is not the same thing as saving them. He didn't answer. He put his face in his hands. We didn't sleep that night. We sat at that table until 4 in the morning, and for the first time in 8 years, we actually talked. Not the pleasant surface-level conversations we'd gotten so good at performing. We talked about the real things underneath. He told me things I hadn't known. That he'd confronted Renee privately, twice, about pulling her weight, and she'd threatened to stop visiting their mother entirely if he pushed her any further. That his reduced work hours had been a choice between that or losing his job entirely, and he'd been too ashamed to tell me the full story. That he'd watched me turn down both of those promotions, and each time felt the ground shift under him, because he knew why I'd done it, and knowing made it worse. not better. I asked him why he hadn't just told me any of this, why he hadn't given me the space to make a different choice. He said, "Because I was afraid if I said it all out loud, you'd finally hear how much you'd given up, and then you'd realize I let you, and then you'd leave." There it was. 8 years of silence, and it came down to fear. His fear dressed up as protection. My fear dressed up as strength. I'm not going to pretend one night fixed everything. It didn't. We started therapy the following month and went every week for nearly a year. We said uncomfortable things. We sat with silences that weren't the comfortable kind. We rebuilt some things and let other things go. Patricia passed away 14 months after that night. I sat beside her at the end, and I held her hand, and I don't regret a single moment I spent with her. That love was real. It still is. Renee came to the funeral, cried beautifully, and disappeared again within the week. Some people only show up for the parts that can be photographed. But here is what actually changed. When the next promotion came around, I told Daniel before I told anyone else. He pulled out his laptop, the same laptop, and we went through the details together. He adjusted his schedule without being asked. He said, clearly, out loud, "I want this for you. Take it." I took it. The spreadsheet still exists. Daniel offered to delete it. I told him not to. I keep it because it is the most honest thing in our marriage. 8 years of someone watching, failing to speak, and quietly breaking under the weight of what they'd witnessed. That document is not a love letter, but somewhere inside it there is evidence that he saw me. Even when he didn't know how to say so, being the strong one is not a personality. It is a cage that the people who love you sometimes help build without realizing it, and sometimes you hand them the materials yourself. If you've been carrying something alone for a long time, I want you to sit with this tonight. Who actually knows what you've given? And have you ever let them? Drop something in the comments if this story hit close to home. I read every single one.